J.J. Abrams has made a name for himself as one of the most hated directors in Hollywood. From creating the worst reviewed Star Trek film to date, to dividing the Star Wars franchise, he has easily made himself enemy number one in both the public and media's eye. But it wasn't always this way. The year is 1966. Jeffrey Jacob Abrams is born to two successful television producers in the Big Apple, introducing JJ to the world of entertainment at a young age.
I think one of the best pieces of advice was from my dad, who, when I was thinking about going to film school, said it's more important that you go off and learn what to make movies about than how to make movies.
All of this led to a very fast-paced childhood, moving from city to city, forcing him to attend several different schools. This made him lose interest in his classes, so he started to play with the idea of following in his father's footsteps.
Action! What I kind of learned early on is that your voice is as important as anyone else's. It's one of those things I think that it's good to be reminded, or if you don't know it at all, be told that thing that you feel, if you really feel it, other people do too. At just 16 years old, JJ would get his first job in the film industry, writing music for Nightbeats.
Situation here.
Just 2 years later, he would graduate from Palisades High School. Staying true to his fast-paced lifestyle, he would move back to New York and attend Sarah Lawrence College.
I remember when I was in college, I would spend most of my time in my room writing screenplays, really bad screenplays, but I was in my room doing that. It's a lot easier to actually write a screenplay than you think it is. It might not be good, but most people talk about writing screenplays but don't actually write them.
Here he would spend his time studying both writing and directing, helping him learn the inner workings of filmmaking.
The first star I ever met was my favorite teacher. His name was Joe Papaleo. He was the first person that made me believe that my voice mattered and that what I wrote actually could be something, could be published someday.
During his final year of college, he got his first big job by creating the film treatment for Taking Care of Business.
James Belushi, Charles Grodin, Taking Care of Business.
I don't know who I am.
Rated R.
JJ would use this to fund his next big project, Regarding Henry, his first ever drama film. However, this wouldn't garner the exact reaction he wanted, as it mostly consisted of negative reviews. Critics called it a boring and shallow film. Although it did have one of the biggest actors at the time in it, Harrison Ford, it still didn't make any sort of impact on his career, leading him to take a break from writing and spend the next 10 years co-producing on a long list of films. This gave him some much-needed insight on the industry, and now he was ready to take a huge leap forward.
Star Trek film, Star Trek Into Darkness, is opening in just a couple of days. People are very excited about it.
I never liked Star Trek when I was a kid. I was not really a fan. My producing partner never saw it. And this movie that we did, the goal was to make a movie for moviegoers, not just for Star Trek fans.
The interesting thing to me was I stopped listening to you when you said you didn't like Star Trek.
September 10th, 2012, filming began for Star Trek Into Darkness, which was the second film of his newly rebooted series. Everything was going smoothly. They were far enough ahead of schedule that they were able to start preparing for 3D screenings. I imagine he felt a bit more at ease directing this film because it had already been done before. So you think all he would have to do is tell the story in his own way, without deviating from the original script too much, which sounds easy enough, right?
It's a fun space adventure movie, but it's not Star Trek in my opinion.
Right.
It's a very well cast movie, they play off each other well. The problem is with everything else.
We couldn't make this movie just for fans of Star Trek. It would have been a far more limiting thing.
Surprisingly, critics responded positively to the film, making it more of a shock to JJ when he started hearing complaints from the fans of the franchise. However, after the director of the original film would see it, his response would only add fuel to the fire, as he called the film just a gimmick, and the fans agreed. Star Trek Into Darkness had Hollywood written all over it. From its sporadic camera movement to its never-ending intensity, it just felt so different from the rest of the franchise. Even ignoring the feel of the movie, it was still hard to sit through the plot, as he managed to somehow make it less interesting. Although his biggest mistake by far was the character assassination of both the protagonist and the villain. He took the calculated leader that was Captain Kirk and made him brash and reckless. The same was done with Khan, who went from being a very vocal and theatrical villain to a cold and angry one. All of this would push fans to express their hate through Twitter and Reddit. Yeah, J.J. Abrams kinda ruined what Star Trek is about and supposed to be about to pander to pop culture. J.J. Abrams ruined Star Trek. I only hope he ruins Star Wars to even things out. This film in particular didn't work for most longtime Star Trek fans, because he took everything good about the original and either removed it or changed it entirely. There was also not enough time put into developing the relationships between characters, as Kirk and Spock fought side by side for years in the show, but in the film we don't get that same sense of connection due to the lack of character development. Fans felt conflicted as the series was near and dear to them, so they continued to question why it failed. However, JJ wouldn't respond to any of the hate or fan concerns until 2 years later, where a very shocking statement would be made. The weakness of the plot was purely my fault. Nobody actually expected him to own up to his own mistakes, so some people began cutting him a bit of slack, allowing the hate to finally cool down. However, what JJ didn't know was that everything he just experienced from this film would be 10 times worse on his next project, Star Wars.
Right now at 7, the very first showing of Star Wars: The Force Awakens.
Here for Force Awakens, super pumped, can't wait to see some action.
It's the first movie I've ever been nervous to see.
Shooting this movie has been a wildly satisfying and gratifying experience.
On January 25th of 2013, Disney and Lucasfilm would announce the return of Star Wars, starting with Episode 7. They would pick none other than J.J. Abrams to write and direct the start of the sequel trilogy. Fans who knew about the failed Star Trek film had a bad feeling, but seeing as JJ openly mentioned that, looking back on my childhood, I had a list of things that were massively important to me. Without question, Star Wars was on that list, and Star Trek was not. This made fans a bit less skeptical of his abilities as he grew up with Star Wars, so he should understand the universe. Star Wars fans were really just looking forward to a new film. Luckily for them, they wouldn't have to wait much longer, as just 2 years later, the film would release. The movie would perform well in the box office, earning roughly $2 billion. Most critics didn't really have anything bad to say early on either. It started to seem like this might be the redemption arc for J.J. Abrams. I mean, you know Disney was happy with that return on investment, so surely the fans had to.
This film is just so deeply, deeply insulting.
You see, The Force Awakens' main issue was the lack of direction. There was no clear villain. Snoke seemed like the new Darth Sidious, but we barely got to see him. On the other hand, Kylo was meant to be like Darth Vader, however he was too weak in every way. I mean, he spent years training in both sides of the Force just to lose his first fight with Rey, who had zero training. Not only did this not make sense, but it also got rid of any chance of him being a threat to Rey and her group. On the other hand, if you compare this to Luke's story, you will see him fail time and time again, portraying Vader as the dangerous villain that he was meant to be, until the final film where Luke is able to defeat him after years of training. Not having a clear or threatening villain is bad enough, but what's even worse is an unrelatable or unlikable main character, which is exactly how the fans responded to Rey. Usually when people bring up her character, the title of a Mary Sue is given to her. To be honest, I would be lying to you if I said she didn't check off each of those boxes. However, opinions aside, this is very bad for a movie, because if your main character comes off as pretentious and annoying to the viewer, then it makes it a lot harder to enjoy the rest of the film. Similar to Star Trek, fans began to see how Star Wars was now becoming too Hollywood. Gone was the fully developed plot and relatable characters, as just like most of JJ's other films, high-energy shots replaced character and story development. This was definitely a bad start to Disney's Star Wars, as The Force Awakens felt like a rip-off of the original story.
I very purposely wanted to sort of revisit the old in order to start and tell the new.
Although this wouldn't go to plan, as even George Lucas himself told JJ that the film was unoriginal, leaning heavily off of the success of the first trilogy and using nostalgia to bring back old fans, which worked for the most part until people realized just how different it was.
That first moment, Luke gets the lightsaber, tosses it over his shoulder. What'd you think?
To me, that felt like the director just going like this to fans.
He would try to admit his wrongdoings years later, but diehard fans were already set on hating him.
For those who hate it, I could not respect your opinion more, and for those who love it, I question your sanity.
This wouldn't be enough to stop people from sending death threats on social media, and although hate in that field of work is common, this has to be the most toxic version of fandom hate I have ever seen. People would reply to his tweets with very descriptive ways in which they wanted him dead, all for making a film that they didn't enjoy. This prompted JJ to take a back seat from Star Wars, instead putting Rian Johnson in the hot seat, which at this point was scolding hot. Sadly for both Rian and JJ, this film would be received even worse by the fans. The Last Jedi marked the end of the sequel trilogy. There was no coming back from what was about to happen.
I'm ending all of this. The tree, the text, the Jedi. I'm gonna burn it down.
I read that and I said, what? I mean, that's not what a Jedi does. How did the most optimistic, hopeful character in the galaxy turn into this hermit?
I really don't know why they thought assassinating the hero of the franchise was a good idea. The once hopeful Luke Skywalker was now gone, being replaced with a grumpy old hermit who gave up on everything he fought for. Of course, the fans were even more mad about this than anything. Soon after this, JJ would announce his return to directing the final film, The Rise of Skywalker.
Who are you?
I'm Rey.
Rey who? Rey Skywalker.
This movie is known as the worst film ever made in cinematic history, at least to Star Wars fans. It basically took everything that didn't work in the last two and dialed it up to 11. There were way too many plot holes, like how did Rey fix Anakin's lightsaber after it was blown up, and why did she even need the Sith dagger to find the destroyed Death Star? Of course, none of this would be answered. Instead, they would add more confusion to the mix by bringing back Darth Sidious, which was their last-ditch effort of having an actual villain. However, in doing so, they made the fights against the Empire in previous movies completely useless, as no matter what, he could just come back at any time, overshadowing Luke's victory in Return of the Jedi. This didn't sit well with longtime fans, as they already didn't enjoy the new films, so unintentionally destroying the plot of the other films was definitely not the move.
The more we talked about it, the more inevitable it felt that this character who was so important in the first two trilogies come back, and in some form.
I think the only good thing that came from this film was how this was the last time we would have to endure Disney's Star Wars for a while.
Does that reduce the chances of a return for Poe Dameron one day?
Probably, but you know, who knows? I need another house or something.
Even after all the hate, he managed to keep his spot in Hollywood, something that not many others have been able to do, especially after angering two of the largest fan bases in science fiction. Although he has claimed responsibility for the backlash from those films, sometimes I wonder, was the failure of the Star Wars sequels really J.J. Abrams' fault, or was he just a puppet on a much larger string?